I want to thank everyone for the donations to Jerry's GoFundMe campaign. I also want to thank everyone who has shared the link on social media. We're up to $555 of the $1,500 goal, and Jerry and I thank everyone involved. I'm including the link in the description for this video as well. Number 1. Real and fake. I've suffered episodes of sleep paralysis all of my life. I had a really horrible and abusive upbringing, and often feel this has a lot to do with it. Along with sleep paralysis, I've also had problems with sleepwalking and severe migraines. This was bad enough when I was a child, but even worse when I had children of my own. I recall the scariest episode of sleep paralysis I've ever had. My husband was working a graveyard shift. I'd put our 2 kids to bed. My daughter, Jenny, was 5 years old at the time. I had a horrid migraine that night, and went to bed on my back. I awoke because I heard this noise off in the corner of my room. Waking up, I almost immediately knew this would be a sleep paralysis episode. I moved my eyes over to the corner of the room. Sitting in the corner was a shadowy figure with light, glowing eyes. It was watching me and blinking. I felt the normal fear one feels during one of these episodes, but tried to keep telling myself that it wasn't real. I watched as the shadow just blinked at me. Then, I heard a noise. Looking over at the door, I watched as the bedroom door slowly began opening. I had never had that happen before. The hallway light was on. As the door opened, I saw my daughter Jenny standing in the doorway. My eyes darted back to the figure in the corner. I was concerned about my daughter. She must have seen me there with my eyes open. She walked a step or 2 into the room. The figure in the corner looked at my daughter, and it got up. Then I heard my daughter tell me, "Mommy, the boogeyman is in my closet. Can I come and sleep with you?" I wanted to call out to her and warn her, or even just answer her, but I could do neither. And while I lay there, the shadowy figure approached her. Even worse, though, another figure came into view. It was also a dark figure, and it was slowly rising up behind my daughter. It must have been crouched down behind her. As it stood up, I realized this was the boogeyman. I had never seen anything in my sleep paralysis that was as scary as this huge figure. It was beastly, had worms burrowing into its skin, and flesh dropping off of its bones. I can't think of how else to describe it. I knew the shadowy figure was just in my mind, but my mind knew my daughter was really in the room with me. If she was in the room with me, then could the figure behind her be real? And both figures were advancing on her. I had never been so afraid, and I couldn't move to help her. Then, Jenny must have become concerned, because I was laying there with my eyes open and not responding. Just as the figures were about to grab her, she ran forward to my side and shook me. Something about the contact woke me up, and immediately the shadowy figure and the boogeyman disappeared. And the only thing standing there was Jenny. I apologized for not answering her and let her sleep in my bed. I've had plenty of experiences since then, but that was the scariest. Number 2. Killer Shadow Cat. I've only had sleep paralysis one time. I assume that is what it was. I don't really believe in the supernatural, so it's the only explanation. I'll skip all the normal stuff about explaining how I go to sleep, and all of a sudden am surprised that I can't move when I wake up. You already know that's part of the story. But I did think when I woke up that I was really paralyzed. It had always been a fear of mine to be paralyzed, so I was deeply concerned. I kept hoping I was dreaming, of course. Then, I looked over at the door, and I saw a black cat's face peer around the side of the door. It looked at me and cocked its head. It began walking into the room. As it was walking, it slowly evaporated. I was really scared now. Then, like in Alice in Wonderland, a smile grew in midair before me. Then the cat appeared into the smile. It was sitting in midair and slowly lowered onto my body. It kept smiling, and a cat smiling is pretty freaky. Then it held out its paw and cocked its head. Suddenly, claws that looked like they belonged to Freddy Krueger grew from its paw. It brandished the paw. I tried to shake my head. Although my head didn't move, the cat seemed to know what I was trying to do. Grinning, it just nodded yes. Slowly, it took its claws and brought them to my stomach. It winked at me, before plunging all 4 claws into my belly. I can't explain it because it didn't hurt, but it did hurt. It repeated this over and over again, basically tearing my entire belly to shreds. It didn't seem to have a reason for this, other than causing me pain, and it just kept smiling at me while it did it. When my entire stomach had been destroyed, I felt a shake, and I woke up. The cat disappeared and my stomach was fine. Although I've never had sleep paralysis again, I've had plenty of nightmares about this feline. The following 3 stories are from the same person and concern an entity he refers to as the Fractal monster. Number 1. This was the first time I had sleep paralysis. Coincidentally, it was the same night that I actually heard of it and learned what it was. There wasn't anything particularly unusual about that night. I put my head down, shut my eyes, and fell asleep like normal. While I was dreaming, though, I noticed that there was something in my dream I just couldn't get rid of. I was completely lucid, but there was this little black blob that would constantly be sitting in the same place, relative to me, no matter where I went or how much I tried to erase it. Eventually I woke up. I was used to waking up in the middle of the night, but this was different. For starters, I couldn't move. Yeah, big shocker, I know, but at the time I was really confused. It didn't take me long to realize that this was sleep paralysis, and that I was experiencing it firsthand. My first thought, being the curious and observant individual I am, was to try and remember how terrified I was throughout the session. If I was going to be afraid, I might as well learn something, right? Well, that plan fell apart once I noticed what was in the room with me. It was the same weird creature from my dream, observing me from the corners of my room. No, not just one corner. All of them. It's hard to describe, since the things your brain dreams up normally defy common sense. But I'll do my best. If you've ever seen a spiral fractal, it was kind of like that, but 3D. It was everywhere, and it was made up of smaller versions of itself. It wasn't necessarily gruesome or horrific, but somehow it still instilled a feeling of pure dread within me. It spoke in some language that, looking back, I shouldn't have been able to understand, but in my dream it made perfect sense. It was less like words, and more like it was just moving information into my head, whilst shrieking. Then, it actually started doing things. It moved towards me, and stretched out its hands, or at least what seemed like its hands. As it grew closer, it grew bigger, and its puny hands eventually wrapped around me. Remember when I said it was made of smaller versions of itself? Well, that wasn't the only time it crushed me down with its hands. I couldn't tell if it was growing or if I was shrinking, but all I remembered was feeling infinitely small. I once heard something about how the human brain can't comprehend infinity, and that if we tried, we'd eventually go insane. And if my cat hadn't woken me up soon after biting my toes, I honestly believe I would have gone completely insane. I don't really know what that monster was supposed to be, but it reminds me of something from an H.P. Lovecraft novel. Number 2. This second story happened a while after the first. I had since had other experiences with sleep paralysis, the generic stuff, like an old lady by your bed, or having needles shoved into you, and all that good stuff. But honestly, none of the physical pain or fear even compared to the dread I experienced the first time. Well, that was until what I've jokingly named Attack of the Fractal Monster 2, Electric Boogaloo. All humor aside though, this one scared the absolute hell out of me. Maybe even worse than the first, and it also caused quite a bit of emotional damage at the time. It started just like the last one, with me falling asleep, entering a lucid state. And this time, I was feeling, well, let's just say I was lonely. Don't judge. Anyway, while I was having some fun, I realized once again that something was off. It had been months since the first experience, but I remember the feeling all too well. I decided to just clear my head and empty out my whole dream, to try and force myself awake, but at that moment, I lost any lucidity I had before. Slowly, the girl whose company I was enjoying began to slowly change. The pores on her face began to melt away, and as someone with pretty severe trypophobia, I almost threw up out of fear. My stomach was heavy, but I couldn't look away. Slowly the girl, who was on top, and yes, that is important later, was taking the shape of that monster from the first dream. From my perspective, I could see the room slowly change back to mine, and once again, I was surrounded with the infinitely repeating monsters, one of which was on top of me. I don't think it was really necessary to hold me down, but they did it anyway. I could once again hear the shrill cries the monster was making, that somehow translated in my head to,
"Last time, I was just hoping to ruin your mind, but I guess that blue rodent of yours saved you."
It was obviously talking about my cat. She's a British Blue, and she's a really sweet cat. But hearing this thing call her a rodent pissed me off.
"Speaking of which, I have that worthless pest right here."
It held up my cat in its weird not-hand appendage. It told me I had a choice, either to watch her get ripped apart, or let myself get ripped apart instead. And the thing about sleep paralysis is that even though you know it's not real, the feeling of fear and pain doesn't go away. I chose the latter, and let the monster tear me apart. It was surreal. I was being shredded down to the atomic level, starting from my feet and working its way up. And the pain. Oh God. It was the most severe pain I've ever felt in my entire life, and it wasn't even real. I heard the monster say something as the shredding reached my knees.
"Maybe I can get you to die from the pain here, so you'll never wake up again. And as for that blue fucker..."
It showed me my cat being shredded apart in various ways that I could never even imagine. I once again felt so small, like I would be driven to insanity by this infinite monster. And as I was searching for a way out of the torture, I remembered a story I heard on YouTube about sleep paralysis, where this one guy could break out of it by imagining a sword in his hand, as some sort of way to make him lucid again. I had started fencing a couple months prior, so I figured I'd give it a shot. I tried imagining the saber in my hand, and surprisingly enough, it worked. I slowly regained lucidity, as well as mobility, and just for good measure, sliced the fucker in half. I wish I could say it felt good, but after seeing all that horrible stuff happen to my little cat, I just couldn't feel good about myself. I spent the entire day holding my cat and lying in bed, asleep. Number 3. This is the third and final experience I had with that weird fractal monster, and it happened just a month ago. I'd gotten used to the routine of fighting off my sleep paralysis with my saber, and it was honestly nice knowing I had some way to defend myself. What makes sleep paralysis so terrifying is the fact that you're just lying in bed, unable to move. But if you take that away, it just becomes a normal dream. Well, this night, all that changed again. I had once again woken up to find myself unable to move, etc., etc. And I see the monster again. Like always, I focus on making my saber appear in my hand, and nothing happens. The monster reaches into itself, and I can see a smaller version of it handing itself something. It pulls it out of its chest to reveal my fencing saber in its hand. It strides over to me, slowly, and almost tauntingly asks, "Are you looking for this?" I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My only method of defense was gone. I was back to being helpless, paralyzed person I was before. This time,
I see that I don't have time to play around. I guess I'll just have to kill you now.
the monster took the saber and stabbed it into my stomach. For whatever reason, it was even more painful than anything in my past experiences. The past ones had been dull, obviously fake, no matter how painful. This one was sharp, and it felt so real. I wanted to cry out, but I couldn't, and as much as I tried, I couldn't make anything else appear in my hand to regain lucidity. The monster pulled out the sword and attempted to make one final slash, but only managed to gouge my arm. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My parents told me I had been in a coma for 2 months, after I'd fallen down the stairs while sleepwalking. I was paralyzed from the waist down, according to the doctor, and I had almost died. The doctor gave off a weird vibe when he spoke, and so did my family. There was something so unnerving about it all. I thought I was just in shock from hearing that I was paralyzed for life, so I didn't give it much thought. Until, that is, the doctor repeated exactly what he had just said, word for word. I tried asking him why he was repeating himself, but he didn't know what I was talking about. I thought I was still drowsy from being asleep, because everyone's voices seemed to overlap. Everyone was staring directly at me, regardless of who they were talking to, and they all seemed to talk over each other. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. I noticed that despite it being a dream, there was still a deep wound on my stomach and arm, and that even though it was supposedly 2 months, my arm was still freshly bleeding. The doctor was saying something about blood flow and blood pressure, but I couldn't even hear him. It was like there was a wall of glass between us when he talked. Finally, he told me my cat had gotten out and was hit by a car while I was in my coma. Then he just started laughing. Not like a light-hearted ha-ha-ha kind of laugh, but a cruel, disgusting laugh, like he was mocking me. It was unnerving, and I was devastated, and I tried to just fall back asleep, hoping I was just hallucinating or something. While I was drifting off, I could hear faint meowing coming from every direction in the hospital bed. I woke up in my room at 5 a.m. from my cat meowing at me to let her out of my room so she could use her litter box. I was holding a hunting knife, and my forearm had been slit open. After that, I never saw the strange fractal monster again. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I want to thank everyone for the donations to Jerry's GoFundMe campaign. I also want to thank everyone who has shared the link on social media. We're up to $555 of the $1,500 goal, and Jerry and I thank everyone involved. I'm including the link in the description for this video as well. Now, a lot of people have been apologizing for not being able to donate, and really there's no need to apologize. I mean, personally, I feel bad asking for help, but nobody should feel bad if they can't donate. Please don't. Jerry and I appreciate the sentiment as well. Knowing that people care is very important. And speaking of this video, if you like the video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or using the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave a comment, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. And always, please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.